You can make a difference. Join the WRTV Volunteer Connection.
Read my lips. No new taxes.
Until now, even talking about raising taxes has been out of the question in the Bush White House. But faced with runaway budget deficits, unpopular budget cuts, the November elections, will he go back on his word? We'll talk to Treasury Secretary Nicholas Brady, House GOP Whip Newt Gingrich, and South Carolina Senator Ernest Hollings tonight.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
It does make you wonder what would happen if they ever passed a truth in campaigning bill. You know, something along the lines of truth in lending consumer legislation that protects you against overly high interest rates. Not that there's anything unprecedented about presidents reneging on campaign pledges. Roosevelt promised to keep the United States out of World War II, but conditions changed. Lyndon Johnson kept warning the electorate that if Barry Goldwater became president, there'd be a huge increase in the number of U.S. troops sent to Vietnam. And there was, even though it was President Johnson who sent them. So perhaps no one is terribly surprised that here we are, less than 16 months into the Bush administration, and the warranty on his famous read my lips, no new taxes pledge seems about to expire. Here's Nightline correspondent Jackie Judd.
The Congress will push me to raise taxes, and I'll say no.
If he said it once, he said it 1,000 times. George Bush elevated these words to a campaign mantra.
Read my lips. No new taxes.
Mr. Bush crisscrossed the country, taunting his opponent, Michael Dukakis, with his tax pledge.
My opponent now says he'll raise them as a last resort or a third resort. But when a politician talks like that, you know that's one resort he'll be checking into.
But that was then.
My opponent.
This is now.
Ladies and gentlemen, candidate Bush said, read my lips. He did not tell the American taxpayers to read his mind.
The White House first floated its trial balloon on Sunday. Senator Dole said after a budget meeting with the president that everything, including taxes, was on the negotiating table. Yesterday, presidential spokesman Fitzwater elaborated. The president, he said, has agreed to no preconditions to begin a debate unfettered with conclusions about positions taken in the past. And today, after an Oval Office meeting, Republican Simpson was the stalking horse, choosing his words carefully.
Nobody is talking about raising income tax rates. There are all sorts of different definitions of revenue, but that's already in the budget. Value-added taxes, additional user fees, taxes on booze and cigarettes, national lottery, 1 cent national sales tax, all sorts of things like that are in the mix. Some of that talked about, some of it not.
Tricky. I guess now the president is saying that raising old taxes is okay, or inheritance taxes is all right, or sales taxes, well, that's all right as well, and maybe even a few hidden taxes. This is a joke. A tax is a tax is a tax.
What brought this debate about taxes, are new and soaring deficit projections. Economics editor Stephen Ogg.
The problem is sufficiently big that the government may have to cut something like $50 or $55 billion from all of its programs. They've talked about cutting $24 billion from defense, but still that leaves an awful lot of money. Somehow money has to be found, whether it's through taxes or cutting programs, and apparently they can't make enough cuts.
So does today's news mean the president is now breaking that campaign pledge of his? No, not so far.
This is the wetting the finger and holding it up and seeing if there's a gale force that's going to blow in yet. At this point, there really hasn't been any commitment to raise taxes.
On Capitol Hill, no gale force winds today, but some turbulence. Democrats fear becoming the fall guy for the president. Correspondent Sheila Cast on Capitol Hill.
the White House Democrats see it, they've got two reasons to worry: economics and politics. They say if the economy is heading into a tailspin, they need to know how bad the White House thinks it's going to be. And then they worry that entering into negotiations will give them half the blame for whatever economic pain is on the horizon.
What worries some within Mr. Bush's own party, especially the right wing, is that to abandon its tax platform would cost them dearly at the polls.
The Republicans have now campaigned so many times against the Democrats as the party of big taxes and big spending that they painted themselves into a corner. When they are the ones that raise taxes, people have a right to say, hey, really, what's the difference?
The president is making a calculation that it's better to take the heat now, in 1990, and risk some setbacks at the polls this year than to risk a recession in 1992 when he's up for re-election, because that's a critical election year. His own future is at stake, and he figures we'd better avoid a recession by taking our lumps now.
Mr. Bush now enjoys enormous popularity, even at a time when a recent ABC News survey shows that most people fully expect him to raise taxes. White House correspondent Britt Hume analyzes the high stakes at play.
The president is running the risk of losing his virginity on the tax issue by agreeing to some new taxes and having very little to show for it. The only circumstance in which he might gain politically is if he's able to get a deal from the Democrats in Congress where they agree to major spending cuts and he to some taxes, a deal that would basically eliminate the federal deficit as a major national problem. Then he might win. Otherwise, it's a very risky proposition.
And what about the man Mr. Bush clobbered at the polls? Does even the whiff of a tax hike vindicate him?
Well, I think the chickens are coming home to roost. You hate to see somebody go out and make a commitment that hasn't been kept and won't be kept. And I suppose if I were a voter who had voted for the president on the strength of this commitment, I'd feel betrayed tonight.
So will the president pay a price if ultimately he goes back on a campaign promise? Yes or no, the answer raises questions about what we're entitled to expect of a candidate and what a candidate feels he owes the voter in terms of candor and credibility. This is Jackie Judd for Nightline in Washington.
Later in this broadcast, we'll talk to the House Republican whip, Newt Gingrich, and to a member of the Senate Budget Committee, Ernest Hollings. But first, when we return, Treasury Secretary Nicholas Brady.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by Visa.
No matter where in the world you find yourself, if you lose your Visa Gold Card, we'll be sure to find you, because Visa will deliver a new card and emergency cash right to you. Whether you're negotiating the powder in Zermatt, exploring the coral off Bermuda, or simply checking out some Puyi Fumé at the Hotel de la British, where you can't even check in with American Express. Visa Gold, it's everywhere you want to be.
Americans have fought long and hard for freedom of choice. But you can order a chicken sandwich at some fast food restaurants, and you have no choice. All you get is an Eenie. But at Rex, we've got an Eenie, a Meanie, and a Miney. The Eenie, Rex Chicken Bacon Club, Meanie's Chicken Mushroom Melt, and Miney is the new Santa Fe Chicken.
Nobody stacks up to Rex.
Eenie, Meanie, and Miney. Where's Mo?
There ain't no Mo.
It's Mercury Motor Mania, a momentous event at your Lincoln Mercury dealer. Save megabucks on Mercury Topaz, $2,450. Plus mountains of money on Mercury Cougar, over $2,000. Magnificent. Imagine a multitude of Mercuries with monumental savings. You'll marvel at your Lincoln Mercury dealer's Motor Mania. We mean to move these Mercuries fast, so make your move today, because nothing will move you like a Mercury. See your Lincoln Mercury dealer today.
The wonderful world of Disney. It's hard to imagine saying anything bad about Mickey Mouse, but in Florida, the mouse is on the defensive. Primetime, Thursday.
I spoke with the Secretary of the Treasury, Nicholas Brady, here in our Washington studios earlier this evening. Secretary Brady, I told you that I would do something that I rarely do for guests, and that is tell you the first question. And the first question, as I mentioned to you before, is let's pretend that this is Sesame Street rather than Nightline. And let's make it real easy. What happened there at the White House on Sunday? What was discussed in nice, easy language that an intelligent 12-year-old can understand?
Well, Ted, what happened was the president asked the four leaders of Congress, Senators Mitchell and Dole, Congressman Michael and Foley, the Speaker, to come to the White House and talk about starting the process whereby we can see how we might try and bring the budget deficit down. The president did say that there are no preconditions. By that he meant he hoped and he wouldn't jump up and walk out of the room if either side brought up a particular subject.
Now, you know, because you've been in this town a long time, and the president who's been around this town, I think, even longer than you, certainly knows that when he says something like that, what he can expect is exactly the headlines that he got the next day in the New York Times and the Washington Post and around the rest of the country, and that is that the president has now opened the door to raising taxes.
Well, I can see how people would say that, but fundamentally, the same absence of preconditions existed last year. I think the reason why people think that it's different this year is that the gap that we have to face is bigger. So everybody knows it's going to take a more determined effort and more revenues from somewhere.
If I ask you a straightforward question as Secretary of the Treasury, in order to narrow that larger gap, do some revenues have to be raised by increasing some taxes of one kind or another? Can you give me a simple answer?
Well, maybe. What I think the answer to your question is that we are going to have to produce the revenues from somewhere. Some will come from cuts, some are going to come from additional revenues. But Ted, I'm not the leader of the Virtuous Tax Debating Society. I'm not here to talk about individual taxes.
You came awful close there for a minute when you talk about raising revenues. I mean, I get it also. I know that there are only two ways to do it. You either cut expenditures or you raise taxes. All I'm asking, I guess, at this point is whether taxes are likely to be raised. I mean, the Democrats appear to be ready to do it. It's the Republicans who drew the line in the sand and said it's the other party that talks about raising taxes. Are we at least bipartisan on this, right?
I think we're bipartisan, but what the president has said, we've got this big gap. We have to attack the problem now. Obviously, everything will be on the table. He did say that there were some other characteristics that he thought ought to be part of the discussion. One is that we ought to do it in a way that we continue the growth that we've had in the economy, and we ought to spend some time making sure the American people understand how we spend money in this country. I hate to tell you, it's not very efficient.
When Alan Simpson comes out of the White House, as he did today, and starts talking about, well, we're not going to raise personal taxes, but we may have to raise some of the sin taxes on alcohol, on cigarettes, things like that. Is that indeed what the president was talking about?
No, well, I don't know what private conversation Alan and the president have, but I think I do know what's in the president's mind, and we have had absolutely no discussions with him about, which tax is better than the other. I take the point that people are going to come from meetings and hear different things, but I think I know what's in the president's mind, and he is not the lead member of the Tax Debating Society.
All right, so when we talk about anything being on the table, am I to take that literally, that anything means, well, it's possible that under, after this thing is thoroughly debated, that what may emerge is not only the raising of sin taxes, it is possible that even personal taxes, income taxes, will be raised.
Ted, that's a question I expect to be asked, but it's not one that I'm going to answer.
I'm just asking you about the possibility, Mr. Secretary. I'm not asking you to commit to it. In other words, when the president says everything's on the table, by everything, I would interpret that to include all kinds of taxes.
Well, look, anybody can put on the table whatever they want, and I think that's the way a discussion like this ought to be started. But what we've got here is an election in the fall. The president wants to start now so that the discussions do not get completely wound up in the election when people will be out campaigning. And two, the problem is big enough that we should start early on it. Everybody knows something is going to have to be done, and he wanted to start early.
All right, Secretary Brady, you're undoubtedly a great Secretary of the Treasury. Kermit the Frog is in no danger. Thank you for joining us, sir. Okay. When we come back, we'll talk to House Minority Whip Newt Gingrich and Senator Ernest Hollings.
The 90s are here, and so is a way to explore new horizons. Introducing the new four-door Explorer from Ford. Explore an interior with more room than any competitor. Explore its exclusive push-button four-wheel drive. Explore its 4-liter V6 power. Discover new four-door Explorer from Ford.
Have you driven a Ford lately?
It's 5 p.m. Do you know what you're paying on AT&T? With MCI Primetime, you'd know exactly. $8 a month for an hour of calls, starting at 5. One price, all evening, all over the country. AT&T could cost $15.
Hello, MCI. I'd like to order your Primetime plan.
Now that you know, call for MCI's Primetime plan.
The Indy 500 comes once a year, but the Indy Beretta just once. Right now, your local Chevy dealers have a limited number of Beretta pace cars. Official pace car of the 1990 Indy 500. Specially striped and specially priced. Then with Cavalier, this area's best-selling car. With freight race savings all month long and the Indy Beretta and Cavalier out in front. It's easy to see that Ford, not even in the race. Catch the Indy excitement in a special edition Indy Beretta or Cavalier from your local Chevy dealers.
Any man who doesn't buy his clothes at Gentry might just as well do this.
The best of America and Italy, 30 to 50% less. Gentry, where the smart money shops. Mayday, Mayday. It's Gentry's Mayday sale. Take a full $50 off our already low prices. Buy a $435 designer suit for $249 and take another $50 off. Gentry, where the smart money shops. Sale ends May 14th.
Thanks to Shoney's, I found a less painful way to stay on my diet. Shoney's light side dinner. Nice puppy.
Pile your plate high with lettuce, all you want it, more upsetted. Celery, peppers, carrots, cheese, soup, fresh fruit, as much as you please. Don't dough around the end, fill her up and do it again. Yeehaw!
Sick, abused. Your pet shop puppy may be the victim of a disease-infested breeding milk.
When you've been raised in a concentration camp, you don't know how to act.
2020, Friday.
Tomorrow, Good Morning America from the great walled city of York.
The architectural wonders of York Minster plus a stroll through the famous Lake District on Good Morning America tomorrow.
Joining us now here in our Washington Bureau are Georgia Congressman Newt Gingrich, who serves as the House Republican Whip, and South Carolina Senator Ernest Hollings, a Democrat who serves on the Senate Budget Committee. Senator Hollings, I think I know what I just heard the Secretary of the Treasury say, but I'd be interested in having you interpret it for me.
Well, Ted, I think what we really should interpret is the need, the problem. If we can define the problem rather than the posturing around, you tried to catch the Secretary everywhere in the world to say the word tax. That's a silly political posturing that's been going on up here too long. No one wants to have taxes, but we've worked our way into a situation whereby you can't get out of the problem of taxes. In other words, the Congressional Budget Office says, look, the deficit is running next year at $160 billion. We've got to add to that $20 billion for FISLIC, or the Resolution Trust Company, and you've got to add to that another $20 billion now, according to Mr. Dahman, with respect to the fall-off in corporate revenues and the increase in interest rates. So that's a $200 billion deficit.
So what you're telling me is whether the word is used or not, taxes are going to have to go up.
Certainly, you've got to come from 200 down to 64. That's 136. You can't do that without taxes. You can't do it in 1 year. And once you start the taxes, there's no reason to come in a minimal effort when a substantial effort is necessary, and otherwise not solve the problem. And
Congressman Gingrich, you know what I was referring to when I said to Secretary Brady a moment ago that there is that line in the sand that the Republicans have drawn a long time ago. That other party is the party that raises taxes. Republicans don't do that kind of thing. Now, where's that going to leave you folks?
Well, first of all, I think that line in the sand has been pretty effective. Walter Mondale promised to raise taxes in 1984. We haven't done it yet. Michael Dukakis promised to raise taxes in 1988. We haven't done it yet. So from the average taxpayer standpoint, you have the longest economic growth in peacetime history without a tax increase. In that sense, that line has worked. Where we're at now is very simple. If we want to keep the economy growing and creating jobs and take-home pay, and I believe President Bush sees that as his first priority, we have to have some ability to control the deficit. I'm curious if the Democrats are prepared to put everything on the table. I mean, they've been eager to get taxes on the table. But for example, would they be willing to let Secretary Cheney actually run the Defense Department for 12 months? Would they be willing to let the President actually reorganize the executive branch if he could save $15 or $20 billion? How much would they be willing to allow the executive branch to be managed over the next 12 months so that we would not have to raise an additional amount of taxes? I think it's important that this be a negotiating session on the entire budget and not simply a negotiating session on taxes.
Congressman, I guess the question that I'm trying to get to, and if we had a longer program, we could discuss just the whole manner of going about running government. I'm going to try and keep you focused, though, on taxes. What's it going to do to your fellow Republicans come election time when the party which has made such an issue of not raising taxes, under the leadership of a president who made it his oft-repeated campaign pledge not to raise taxes, ends up doing just that?
I'm not at all convinced, Ted, we're going to do that. I'm convinced that we are prepared to go into a negotiating session with the Democrats. We're prepared to try to find a way to reach a good agreement. But if we can't reach a good agreement, I think this president will flatly accept the sequester and cut spending across the board rather than give in to the kind of Democratic tax increase that would weaken the economy. So I'm not willing to accept the hypothesis you're setting up.
Well, let me, rather than setting up a hypothesis, just take the numbers that Senator Hollings used a moment ago. Do you see the same numbers? Do you see the same need to save?
The numbers that Director Darman has used range from about $55 billion to a hypothetically high of $100 billion. I think 55 to 60 is more probable. It would be hard to get to that amount, but again, if everything is on the table, the president had $13 billion in new revenue in his budget. 4.5 of that came from capital gains, and frankly, if the Senate Democrats hadn't blocked the capital gains tax cut, we'd have 500,000 new jobs. We would have higher corporate income that they'd be paying taxes on. We'd have higher take-home pay that they'd be paying taxes on. So the Senate Democrats, having killed 500,000 jobs, are now screaming to raise taxes. I want to know, is everything going to be on the table, including control of the executive branch? Because if we can save the money through better management, then I think that significantly reduces the pressure to raise taxes.
Senator Hollings, is it doable without raising taxes? And indeed, I don't hear the Democrats, at least not since Sunday, screaming for taxes. I think
no, they're not screaming for taxes. The fact of the matter is, the Republicans have favored this indirect tax and the increase of interest costs. It jumped $27 billion this year. Next year, with a $3 trillion debt, 10% interest, it's going to jump another $30 billion. Otherwise, President Bush has supported the increase in Social Security taxes this January, and Senator Monahan, myself, and other Democrats have said, let's quit financing this horrendous spending with the Social Security tax on the working Americans. And we're doing away with that particular tax and being realistic and come in with a real revenue program in order to put us back in the black. You got to remember, too, President Bush changed signals now from President Reagan. President Bush comes now and he wants education and increased spending. He wants increased spending on the environment, for child care, for drugs, for research and everything else. Everybody up here wants to increase spending, but nobody wants to pay the bill. I think we've got to pay the bill in order to really keep down that interest cost and keep this economy stable.
Senator Hollings, we're going to take a break. We'll continue our discussion in just a moment.
even the most remote areas of the country, can now be reached at the following number.
The Guaranteed Advantage saves you $500 on Jeep Wrangler.
What's fair is fair. And frankly, Price Pfister is the fairest faucet of them all. Starting with the fabulous finishes they offer outside, right down to the feat of engineering that's inside. The quality is formidable, thanks to a heart of solid brass. And another fine feature is how affordable it is. So find yourself a Price Pfister, the fabulous faucet with a funny name.
At Enterprise Rent-A-Car, we don't just care about the distance our cars go, but the distance our people go. Call us.
Great.
We'll come pick you up.
That's 200 Rogers Road. Right?
Enterprise. We go the extra distance.
It started with a hand, because shape and feel are as significant as lens and shutter. Introducing the Infinity Super Zoom 330 from Olympus, where great pictures and great design go hand in hand.
From now on, there's only one thing to remember about saving on long distance. Sprint Plus always costs less than AT&T. And for a limited time, Sprint Plus comes with 1 free month of the best-sounding long distance. That's right, 1 free month. Just call 1-800-877-4000 now. Don't miss Sprint Plus with 1 free month. Now the best savings plan saves you even more.
And back once again with Congressman Newt Gingrich and Senator Fritz Hollings. Congressman Gingrich.